Hello, welcome to the first year Polytechnic course of Guru Nanak Institute of Technology, Kolkata. I'm Dr. Indrajit Bose and I shall be your course coordinator for this session. This paper is entitled Communicative English, and in the course of this paper, we are taking a look at the various forms and modes of written and spoken communication, especially in the workplace context. I think you are all aware that once you pass out of this course, you will be joining the industry, and in the workplace, you are required to write various kinds of documents, especially those related to the carrying on of business. So, reports necessarily have an important part to play over there. In fact, in the day to day running of all organizations, various reports have to be submitted. So you will find that you will have to write reports in a good proportion of your working time. Now, one of these types of reports is what today's lecture is all about. This is about the writing of a feasibility report, which is lecture 3 in the series. In the course of this lecture, we shall be taking a look at what exactly is a feasibility report, and I shall be dwelling on the nature and the features of a feasibility report and the detailed format of writing a feasibility report. We should also be considering some steps to preparing a feasibility report and looking at a sample report with the help of a case study. Right, so let us begin the work. Now, a feasibility report basically is a report on the viability and the practicality of a certain project, and it studies the potential solutions to business problems and opportunities. You know that we are working on various projects at different points of time in the corporate or business world. Now, these projects are concurrently running. Also, other projects in the future may be in the pipeline. Now, how does the higher management decide whether these projects which are being proposed for the future are really workable or not? How do they know that they will be successful or not? How do they know that they can be properly implemented in order to increase the growth prospects of the organization or not? Now, these and other questions would be answered by this type of a report or a feasibility report. In fact, a feasibility report is a necessary prelude to taking action. It assists decision makers in making choices. Now, whether the given task is done with available resources or not, and whether you need more resources for that, and it considers all the possible options which are available and which ones can be selected and which ones may not be selected or which ones can be improved upon. So these and other questions are answered by the feasibility report, which is what we are going to take a look at now in greater detail. Now, the features of this kind of a report. First of all, the introduction to such a report should be appealing because it should appeal to the decision makers by way of giving an introduction to new prospects or new opportunities for growth which are envisioned in the form of a new project. Also, they help to map out the criteria of the logical outcomes, and they enable us to come to practical and logical decisions. You see, decision making is a very important, crucial, and a very difficult exercise which the higher management has to be involved in. Uh, when you come to decisions about future planning prospects, you need to think carefully about how to invest your financial capital, how to deploy your other resources in order to get maximum benefits. Also, you need to look at the criteria that will operate in this case and also map out certain constraints which might be functioning. You have to use accurate and credible sources in order to do this kind of a realistic study or mapping. Also, reliable research methods have to be used. The data that you supply needs to be 100% accurate, of course, because otherwise you will not be able to do any kind of a future projection or planning. Also, a realistic overview of alternative options is given by the report, and we can evaluate the options using the criteria. The conclusion of this report comes up with the conclusive observations based on the findings, and the recommendations part at the end state which options are preferable and what you have to do, or in other words, the action planning that is involved in implementing this kind of a project for the future. So the feasibility report is a necessary prelude to the implementation of future projects and programs. It is practical in orientation and extremely realistic and envisions growth prospects in a pragmatic manner. So we have to write these reports or feasibility reports in order to assess whether options for the future are viable or not. So it is very essential for future planning and projection. Okay, now what is the format of this kind of a report? Now, first and foremost, we have an executive summary. Now, the structure or layout of this type of report is really like any other long report, or you can say that it's like a formal report of the long report variety. So it replicates all those report parts as well, just like we have for other long reports. So first there's an executive summary which is concise and gives us a preview of the full picture which is involved, and also includes some of the major findings and recommendations. So it is all given in the form of a brief synopsis in the report. Now the introduction to this report next looks at the major problems or the major issues which have led to the writing of the report in the first place, and which are the options for change or for solution of the problem which are involved over here, and what will be the criteria, the method, and the general background. So all this is really included in the body of the introduction, which begins the report proper. Then we have, of course, the mapping of the criteria or constraints. Now, there are various questions which the writer of this report will really strive to answer. These are, will this project really improve the functioning in the future? What about the implementation part? Is it practical? Is it feasible? What about the cost involved? Will that be too burdensome, or will it be properly met from the funds and other resources? What about the desirability? Okay, so is it really eminently desirable for future growth prospects, or is it not so desirable at present? So these and other questions are going to be answered by the criteria or constraints which will be discussed in the body of the report. Then there is also an evaluation or the assessing of facts or evidence against each criteria. The conclusion then, of course, gives us the points which are arrived at the end of the report and the significance of the report from the reader's viewpoint. Finally, the report closes with a set of recommendations which map the future course of action to be followed and the specific steps for implementation. So these are some of the features or points of the report. So what are they? Let's just do a quick recap. We have, first and foremost, the executive summary. Then we have the introduction, which looks at the problem, looks at the options for change and the criteria, methods, and background. It delves a little into the background of the issue. Then the mapping of the criteria or constraints. Then the evaluation part, assessing the evidence against each criteria. Then the conclusion, and finally the recommendations, which give us the action planning for the future. Okay, let us then proceed. Okay. Yes. Now, what would be the steps to writing this kind of a report? First and foremost, of course, we have to brainstorm on the issue. So the issue might be a kind of problem. So please intensively brainstorm on this issue, and you might do a process of association and jot down keywords or important ideas which come to your mind at this point of time. So it's better to write them down at this stage so that you later can develop or expand these ideas. Then what comes next, of course, is the doing of research. So once you have got the main ideas or you have thought of some ideas and points, then please do research intensively on these ideas and get the necessary background for doing your study. Then you identify the options which are available or which are existing, and then explore them one by one. Then consider the viability from various aspects: legal, financial, operational, environmental, involving time factors, and so on. So look at it from different contexts, different perspectives, and varied prospects. Prepare detailed plans on the basis of your study as much as possible. Then make a first draft, then revise that and incorporate changes to prepare a final draft. So again, a lot of revision work and editing is involved in the preparation of this kind of a long report. These are some of the steps to writing a report of this type. Then we have to look at a sample study. I'm going to look at a sample study of a topic involving the expansion of a dairy farm located in a small district in Maharashtra, in a rural district, and the development of that dairy farm into a milk manufacturing plant. So basically what is an agro-based industry, so that transforms itself into a manufacturing industry, which is again based on that infrastructure to start off with and uses the resources, but transforms that by making it into an industrial project. Okay. Now, what about the location of this dairy farm? Let's look at the parameters of the case study. This dairy farm is located in rural Maharashtra, 23 kilometers from Nagpur. So it's not too far from the city, really, though it is located in the rural belt. And it is located again a few kilometers away from Akola. So it is located in the Vidarbha region, in the rural belt, but not too far from the city of Nagpur, the town of Akola. It's a fairly large dairy farm of 200 hectares, and there are 1,000 milk cattle, and the farm is manned by 150 workers. So these are some of the features of the case study. Now, the existing customer base of this dairy is mainly rural customers or customers in the rural base within a radius of 50 kilometers. So mainly the customers are people from the rural area and not from the city. And basically the customers do not live too far away. So within 50 kilometers is very close. Now, the projected new venture is really the takeover of a nearby milk manufacturing plant. So it's not as if the authorities or the owners of this dairy farm were trying to transform it overnight into a milk manufacturing plant. For that, there is already existing a milk manufacturing plant nearby, which the management of the dairy farm is purchasing or it is buying. So it will convert that milk manufacturing plant to its own purposes, right? So it will kind of adapt that into their own business, and they will still retain the dairy farm, but they will really convert the proceeds into a milk manufacturing plant by using full-fledged machinery. So this is basically the case study or the sample. And the problem or the issue involved is whether the transformation of what is an agro-based industry or the dairy farm into an industrial plant is really viable, and it is going to be effective for the the authorities of the dairy farm in the future or not. Okay. Now, provided we have got these factors in the case study. Now, suppose I'm preparing a feasibility study on the basis of the information that I can collect from the local areas. Now, the problem for consideration in this feasibility study would be whether this expansion project is a viable one or not, and whether it's feasible to do that within a short time, and will it be economically viable, which is the most important question, I think, which needs to be addressed over here. Now, the various options or criteria to be considered would be economic or the funding of the new venture, the technology that is involved in running a new venture, again, the resources, both people, or that is manpower, financial resources, and natural resources, and other kinds of resources. Also, the people who are involved or who are going to be involved in this transformation process, and the packaging and distribution network, because it's not just enough to manufacture the milk in the milk manufacturing plant. That the milk manufactured has to be packaged and it has to be sold in the market in order to arrive at some sort of profits. So those issues are also involved. So there are a lot of options to be considered. Let us consider some of them in the writing of this sample feasibility report. Okay, so this is the opening section of this report. First, we have the cover page. Now, the title of the report is centered 1 inch bold from the top. It's a feasibility report on the expansion of milk-fed dairy in Nolapur. Nolapur is the place where this dairy is located. By MAFCO Cooperative, July 2007. So, July 2007 is the time when this feasibility study or report is being mapped out and presented, and in fact it has been undertaken a little before, and the work for that has been compiled from various sources. So this is the cover page. Okay. Next, let us see what we have. Okay, the introduction. Now, before the introduction, we have the executive summary. Now, let us see what is contained in the executive summary. I'm just going to read out from the sample summary of this report, which is presented over here. This report takes up the issue of the projected expansion of milk-fed dairy in Nolapur, Akola district, Maharashtra, into milk-fed dairy industry. So that's what is going to be the transformation. A self-sufficient milk manufacturing unit of 30,000 tons. With a strong rural base and rural customers in the Akola, Wardha, Gadchiroli region, the dairy is planning to expand as a supplier to the city market. So it's really a big challenge. Okay, the dairy is planning to expand as a supplier to the city belt in Nagpur. The industrial infrastructure and expertise available, the available funding from NAFCO and NABARD Rural Development Scheme 3 and the provisions of training labor in milk production, processing and packaging were studied. The possibilities of innovative marketing and the cost of an ad campaign was also examined. Finally, an overview of the predicted marketing, processing, distribution was also made. The report found strong possibilities for the expansion and advocated industrial training and speedy disbursement of capital for the materialization of the project. Okay, so after considering from various aspects, the report that has been prepared has given a green signal or given a go ahead for the project. In other words, the feasibility is strong and there is a strong possibility that this process of transformation of the dairy into a dairy industry or milk manufacturing or dairy manufacturing plant will be a successful one. Okay, so what is included in the summary basically, or the executive summary? What is basically included over here is the identification or specification of this project. So the specifics of the projects are given. The basics of the dairy farm are outlined over here. And then the sources of funding from NAFCO and NABARD Rural Development Scheme 3, they are given. The overview of an ad campaign which will be required in the future, distribution network. So all these things are envisioned and discussed. And after discussing all the possibilities, the findings of the report and the conclusions reached, they are also given. So it's a summary which is all encompassing and inclusive and gives us all the details of the report in brief. Next, we go over to the introduction. Now, the introduction is telling us various things about the background and various reasons why the report is written and other factors. So let us just read briefly from the introductory section to this sample report. Introduction. The report is a feasibility study based on the issue of the conversion of mainly rural-based dairy into a full-fledged industrially operated dairy products manufacturing plants. It is based on a careful study of the sources and scenario at Nolapur and the technology training, funding, and marketing conditions which are available. The report now then goes on to talk about the funding. Okay. It begins with the consideration of the funding available from NAFCO and other NABARD rural development schemes. Together, they will provide an investment capital of rupees 6.5 lakhs. Further funding under the SBI Gramin Udyogikaran Prakalpa of rupees 2.5 lakhs may be obtained. Okay. Then the introduction goes on to identify some of the challenges in the options which are available for the project transformation. Some of the following challenges were seen. What are they? The training in milk processing, industrial exposure, and no existing city consumer base. Okay, so this is a problem. The dairy plant, or the dairy farm rather, workers do not have the adequate training which is required for processing the milk, pasteurization of milk, which the workers of the factory have. And they have very little industrial exposure, which is very natural because they are the citizens of a rural belt, and they don't have a city consumer base. Again, this is quite likely that it can happen because they are not based in the city. Now, apart from funding, the other transformation options explored were as follows. Okay, so what were the other options? Let us read. The land acquisition and assessment of the Durand dairy plant adjoining milk-fed dairy was examined. So this is the other dairy plant which this farm is trying to take over. Durand dairy has existing infrastructure required for building a fully automated dairy. The production machinery and pasteurization unit were all available. So further investment in terms of capital expenditure in machinery will be saved. So this is a big blessing in disguise rather, because otherwise the dairy farm would have to spend a great deal of money in order to get the necessary equipment or machinery for pasteurization, processing and other details. So they are getting instead an already made milk manufacturing plant at their hands, so they can make use of the opportunity which has come their way. Okay, let us see further. Training options were mapped by mapping compatible training offered by MAFCO. This is also a cost-effective solution. Now, MAFCO is a farmers' cooperative in the state of Maharashtra. Now, bottling and packaging provisions were also studied by looking at the nearby Atlee bottles and mineral bottles packaging company. Okay, so either rope in Atlee bottles by signing an agreement with them to make the bottles and the covers and labels for this brand, or else give them a contract of some kind or outsource it to them. Uh, at the end, what do we get in the introduction? Finally, a detailed study for the extension and conversion of the rural consumer base is given for transformation into a city-based company. Okay. So these are the points which are discussed in the introduction. Identifying the problem, looking at the prospects, then discussing the prospects one by one, and finally looking at the viability of the whole scheme or project. Okay. So these things are covered in the course of the introduction, which is fairly comprehensive as you can see, and very detailed in terms of the facts it contains. Okay. Now, after this, what we come to are the methods and sources for this study. Now, the following were the sources of study used. I'm reading out again from the case study. NAFCO Rural Finance, NABARD Rural Development Scheme 3, and the SBI Gramin Udyog Act. Okay. Now, information is also obtained from the Survey of India of 2007, and the study of the Durand Dairy Plant in Nodapur, and the study of the Atlee Bottling Plant in Nodapur, and the training procedures of NAFCO. Okay. Now, in preparing the report, the following methods of study were used: finance scheme papers, interview with SBI and NABARD officials, consultation with the site engineers of Durand Dairy, and the interview with MAFCO officials and attending MAFCO training workshop. So all these things are the sources. Now, what about the evaluation of the options? First of all, we have the economic options. The viability considerations are related to the capital investment which is required for acquiring industrial machinery for milk production and bottling and packaging. The advertising campaign in the rural areas will be required for the new plant which is coming up in the form of banners, signboards on public media, then radio, TV, internet, not just in the rural areas, of course, but in the urban areas. And we also will be requiring milk vans for the marketing. Now, the outlets in the city required for distribution. Also, we need to get outlets for distribution of the milk packets and other dairy products in the city. Now, the approximate cost involved for all this is rupees 7 lakhs. Now, the finance available is from NAFCO, SBI, and other sources. So, from NAFCO, we are getting 4.5 lakhs. From NABARD Rural Scheme, we are getting 2 lakhs. And from the SBI, 2.5 lakhs. And the total funding available, therefore, is of rupees 9 lakhs, which is quite adequate, I think, in order to cover this kind of a project. Now, the takeover of the Durand Dairy Farm with all its machinery will cost rupees 3 lakhs. So the further contract also needs to be signed with Atlee bottling plant. So they are signing a contract about 20% profit share. Now you can enter into a contract of any type, and no further investment in the machinery is required. Okay? So this is a strong plus point and a good money saver, because you see, industrial machinery, especially in the milk manufacturing plant, is quite expensive. So if the organizers of the business had to invest in this kind of machinery, then they would have to spend a great deal of the working capital in setting up the plant itself. Now they are not having to do this because they are getting a ready-made dairy plant at their hands, and they just have to make use of it. Okay. Now, so these are the economic considerations, which are some of the most important ones. Now, next, what we have to consider is manpower and training. Now, there are various viability considerations like the manpower that is required for milk production and marketing. They also need training in quality management and uh, other aspects of production. Also, we need ad design. Now, what are the resources available? Let us map them out side by side. What is required? I have just told you what is required. Now, let us map that out with what is available. Now, the resources available include all the available manpower from the dairy plant. Now, the dairy farm has got manpower of 150 people around approximately. So all these people are seasoned workers, and many of them are old-time workers of the dairy farm. Now they just have to get to know the modus operandi for these kinds of industries and a few other details, because they have already been in this business, the milk manufacturing business, for a pretty long time. So they are not totally inexperienced, and they can make good the transformation of the dairy farm into a dairy products manufacturing industry. And additionally, there is the interesting piece of news that NAFCO, the Farmers Cooperative in Maharashtra, will be providing free training, okay, in the production and packaging of milk and other dairy products. So that is really a big advantage which the company can make use of. Also, ad designers which will be required in order to prepare the advertising, or to prepare campaign blitz which hits the trail once the products are out in the market. So it need ad designers for preparing them in the ad campaign. But of course, the designers can be hired on a contract basis. Okay, so that takes care of some of the problems. Okay, now, so therefore, we can say that from this part that it is possible to conclude that the training and manpower needs of the new project will be satisfactorily met. Okay, now the next part to consider is the evaluation and the distribution of the new products. So the viability considerations include whether we have the adequate manpower for marketing, the mapping of the new market routes, mapping and manning the new routes with the help of drivers, helpers, and distributors. So you not only need new outlets in cities and other places, but you need to man all those outlets. So a lot of manpower is also required. Now, the resources available include the available manpower from the dairy farm, and 6 milk vans. Now, there are some problems over here which have been detected, that the dairy employees are not conversant with the city routes. It's very natural. They are not very well acquainted with the city. So in the mapping of the routes and in the creation of outlets for selling. So they will not be able to, initially at least, play a very constructive role. So this is a problem. And another problem is that all these new outlets in the city will be required because the organization is thinking of selling in the city areas of Nagpur and Akola. So you'll need a lot of city outlets in order to do the marketing part. Now, having a lot of outlets is not a cost-effective exercise after all, and you need to build up these outlets, and a lot of expenditure is involved in their creation and maintenance. So we can look at the concluding observation from this section that it will be possible after training manpower in the city routes and the manning the new city outlets for which leads will be taken. Okay, so some solutions can be arrived at of these issues also. Now, the conclusion that comes after looking at the economic factor, the manpower allocation, the other resources, and the marketing and distribution networks would be that considering all these various aspects, the problems that are present are relatively limited and they can be worked upon. So we can really have this kind of a milk manufacturing or developing plant. Now, the conclusions are like this. The finance is available to the amount of rupees 9 lakhs. It will cover the infrastructure and industrial plant acquiring costs and other expenses. The requisite manpower is available, only they have to be trained. And required training will be given by MAFCO, which is the Farmers Cooperative, as I have said. And a lot of advertising can be done, and marketing needs to be taken care of. Okay. Now, what will be the constructive recommendations made on the basis of this report? Now, first of all, the immediate purchase of Duran dairy plant. If there's going to be takeover, then better not wait for long because Duran dairy farm is in the market, so it might be snapped up by somebody else. So suppose somebody else buys it, it will be very difficult for the organization to arrange for an alternative dairy plant which is in the process of being sold. So snap it up or acquire the Duran dairy plant as quickly as possible. Also arrange for an industrial training of the manpower by MAFCO as soon as possible. Also make a contract with the ad designers, the city-based ones, and enter into a marketing contract with the city-based suppliers. So obviously you have to do that. You have to interact with people in the city. So it is not possible to be in any kind of rural isolation. And the management of this dairy obviously had some foresight and was thinking into the future when they thought of expanding their business into the city. So taking the milk from the villages to the city. So maybe it was ambitious of them, but they had good vision. And it is certainly possible to develop this dairy plant, undertake the necessary processing and treatment of the milk and other products, and then do the advertising for the new products and the aggressive marketing campaign or strategy, which will be targeted at a city audience. So these are some of the factors that went into the feasibility study, and we can say that the feasibility study, or the sample feasibility study, has really shown us that this project is really a viable one and that it can be undertaken in a very effective way in order to achieve growth prospects for the dairy farm by converting itself in a very fitting manner. So this brings us to the end of this lecture. So I would like to thank you. Okay, so I would like to stop with this